The history of the samurai and feudal Japan. Japan is this incredible archipelago made up of nearly 7,000 islands, all scattered across the western Pacific Ocean. Being so isolated helped create a unique civilization that grew up mostly on its own, even while getting some cool influences from the Asian mainland every now and then. This special environment led to the rise of the samurai tradition and the feudal system that shaped Japan for almost 1,000 years. The Japanese landscape is pretty dramatic, with volcanic mountains covering about 80% of the land. These mountains act as natural barriers, creating distinct local identities. Dense forests blanket the steep slopes, and narrow coastal plains are dotted with rice paddies, forming a vibrant patchwork of green. In this stunning setting, a truly unique society emerged. Now, the term samurai comes from the Japanese verb saburao, which means to serve. For samurai, serving their lord, family, and a strict code of honor was everything. They were much more than just warriors. They were also administrators, artists, and philosophers, playing a key role in a complex social order that lasted for centuries. The tale of feudal Japan stretches over 2,000 years, from its ancient beginnings to the last samurai rebellions in the 19th century. It's filled with stories of honor, betrayal, and amazing cultural achievements amidst fierce battles. The warrior elite created a rich culture and value system that still captivates people today, long after their swords have been put away. They balanced the arts of peace and war with incredible dedication. The origins of Japan. The first folks to settle in the Japanese archipelago came over land bridges during the last ice age when Japan was still connected to the Asian mainland. These early inhabitants created a vibrant hunting and gathering culture called Jumen, known for some of the world's oldest pottery, all while living in harmony with the lush forests and rich seas around them. Their spiritual practices focused on honoring nature spirits, which laid the groundwork for Japan's indigenous Shinto religion and shaped Japanese culture for ages. A big cultural shift kicked off around 900 BCE with new migrations from the Asian mainland, marking the Yayoi period. These newcomers introduced wet rice agriculture, weaving, and metalworking, totally changing life in the archipelago. Growing rice was hard work, requiring teamwork and complex irrigation systems, which led to more structured societies and powerful clan leaders. By the 4th century, we start seeing signs of social stratification. Massive burial mounds, known as kofan, popped up across the landscape, signaling the rise of influential ruling elites. The discovery of horse trappings, weapons, and ceremonial items in these tombs shows how important military strength was becoming among these early Japanese leaders, who were the distant forerunners of the samurai class. Writing made its way to Japan through Chinese characters, which were gradually adapted to fit Japanese sounds. Since prehistoric Japan didn't have writing, much of its early history is wrapped in legends and myths, passed down orally until chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki were compiled in the 8th century. These early records mix history with mythology, telling the tale of how divine beings created the Japanese islands and how the imperial lineage traces back to the sun goddess Amaterasu, legitimizing their rule for centuries. Rise of the Yamato state. As different regional powers started to come together in early Japan, one clan really stood out, the Yamato clan. They took charge in central Japan during the 4th and 5th centuries, laying down the first real state structure in Japan. This powerful family claimed they were descendants of the sun goddess Amaterasu, which gave them a divine connection that helped legitimize their rule for ages. The Yamato rulers managed to unite various clans through a mix of military strength, smart marriages, and religious influence, marking the start of the Japanese imperial line, the oldest continuous monarchy in the world. A game-changing moment in Japanese history happened in 538, when Buddhism officially made its way to Japan. This new faith brought along advanced technologies, Chinese writing, and fresh political ideas. At first, some conservative clans resisted it, preferring their native Shinto beliefs. But over time, Buddhism gained support from the imperial family and started reshaping Japanese culture. Prince Shotoku, who was regent from 594 to 622, became a major supporter of Buddhist learning and Chinese-style governance. He helped build Japan's first big Buddhist temples, sent diplomatic missions to China, and created Japan's first formal legal code, the 17-article Constitution, which focused on Confucian ideas of harmony and respect for authority. The most significant change for the early Japanese state came with the Taika reform in 645. This series of sweeping changes, inspired by the Chinese Tang dynasty, brought about a centralized government, a new legal code, and a system for redistributing land. The new setup aimed to abolish private land ownership, declaring all land as the emperor's, and it established a comprehensive administrative system. To put this ambitious plan into action, Japan set up its first permanent capital at Hijaki, now Nara, modeled after the Chinese capital Chang'an. Even with these big reforms, the reality of Japanese politics often strayed from the Chinese model. Powerful aristocratic families still held sway over the court and their local areas, turning court positions into family legacies. This period set the stage for a mix of centralized power and significant regional autonomy, a balance that would shape Japanese feudalism for centuries to come. The Heian period. In 794, Emperor Kanmu made a big move by shifting the capital to a new city called Heian-kyo, which we now know as Kyoto. This city would be Japan's imperial hub for over 1,000 years. At the top of Heian society was the imperial family, surrounded by a tight-knit group of court nobles who created a super-refined culture focused on beauty, literature, and elaborate ceremonies. For these elites, art and aesthetics were everything. The Fujiwara clan was the most powerful noble family during this time. They cleverly controlled court politics by marrying their daughters to successive emperors. By positioning themselves as maternal relatives and acting as regents to young emperors, the Fujiwara effectively held the reins of power while keeping up the appearance of direct imperial rule. Interestingly, women in the Heian period enjoyed a level of freedom and cultural influence that was pretty rare. Many were well educated and wrote some of the greatest literature of the time, including Murasaki Shikibu's The Tale of Genji, which is often hailed as the world's first novel. While the court aristocracy was busy developing their sophisticated culture, significant changes were happening in the provinces. The system for collecting public land and taxes began to crumble as nobles. Temples and shrines gathered tax-exempt estates. The imperial court, focused on ceremonial duties and cultural pursuits, slowly lost its grip on the countryside. This loss of control led to the rise of local military bands formed by influential families. It was during this period that the term samurai, meaning one who serves, first popped up to describe these armed retainers. Unlike the court's refined culture, these samurai emphasized martial skills, personal loyalty, and practical governance. Two major warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamato, rose to prominence. Both claimed distant imperial lineage and had long served as military leaders for the court. The Taira, led by Taira no Kiyomori, gained significant influence, but their arrogance made them many enemies. Meanwhile, the Minamoto clan, under Minamoto no Yoritomo, rebuilt their strength in eastern Japan, setting the stage for a major conflict that would establish samurai dominance for centuries to come. The Genpei War and Rise of the Samurai. Tensions between the Taira and Minamoto clans finally boiled over into full-blown warfare in 1180, kicking off the 5-year conflict we now call the Genpei War. This struggle was huge. It solidified the samurai's grip on Japanese politics. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who was in exile at the time, jumped at the chance to turn his clan's fortunes around. He set up shop in Kamakura, a spot that was naturally easy to defend and far from the imperial court in Kyoto. The war was intense, featuring massive battles with thousands of mounted samurai, naval clashes, and siege tactics. Warriors fought not just as solo champions in one-on-one duels, but also as organized groups following smart strategies. Back then, samurai were mostly mounted archers, and the bow was their go-to weapon. The pivotal naval battle of Dan no Ura in 1185 crushed Taira naval power, forcing many Taira warriors to take the ultimate plunge into the sea rather than face capture, which pretty much marked the end of Taira dominance. Winning the Genpei War gave Yoritomo a chance to consolidate power like never before. He created a new government structure called the Bakufu, or tent government, based in Kamakura. In 1192, he was granted the title of Sei Taishogun, or shogun, by the emperor, setting the stage for a hereditary military government. The shogun acted as the emperor's military deputy, but held the real political power. Yoritomo's government laid down the rules for feudal rule that would stick around in various forms until 1868. The heart of this new feudal system was the personal bond between lord and vassal. Warriors pledged loyalty to Yoritomo, and in return, they got official recognition of their land rights and authority. The Minamoto's victory and the birth of the Kamakura shogunate marked the samurai's rise to the top. The values tied to the samurai-like martial skill, unwavering loyalty, and practical governance became the new cultural standard. Even as they gained political power, samurai started to embrace aspects of aristocratic culture, like poetry and calligraphy. This blend of martial and artistic values became a defining feature of samurai culture. The Kamakura shogunate. With the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan entered a new historical phase defined by samurai governance. The Bakufu evolved into a complex governmental institution with administrative bureaus, judicial courts, and deliberative councils. Following Yoritomo's death in 1199, actual power passed to the Hoji clan, Yoritomo's relatives by marriage. The Hashi family instituted a regency system, installing imperial princes or members of the Fujiwara family as titular shoguns while wielding real authority themselves. This complex structure of delegated authority reflected a distinctively Japanese approach to political legitimacy, where direct power was veiled behind layers of ceremonial authority. The Kamakura Bakufu governed through a network of vassals who had sworn personal loyalty to Yoritomo. These gokunin, or housemen, received official recognition of their land holdings and administrative authority in exchange for military service. The shogunate appointed G2, or stewards, to manage and collect revenues from estates and shugo, or constables, to maintain order and lead military forces in each province. This system allowed centralized control while accommodating the realities of limited communication and transportation technology in medieval Japan. During this period, the emerging samurai class developed distinctive cultural values and spiritual practices that would define their identity for centuries. The ideal of Bushido, the way of the warrior, began to take shape as a code of conduct emphasizing loyalty, honor, martial skill, and self-discipline. Zen Buddhism gained particular influence among the samurai during the Kamakura period. Its austere discipline, emphasis on direct experience, and rejection of elaborate ritual appealed to warrior sensibilities. Zen monks often served as advisors to shogunate officials, and Zen monasteries became centers for the transmission of continental culture. The Kamakura shogunate faced its greatest challenge in the Mongol invasion attempts of 1274 and 1281. Under Kublai Khan, the Mongol Empire dispatched massive fleets and armies to conquer Japan. Both invasions were repelled, in part due to severe storms that destroyed much of the Mongol fleet. These fortuitous storms, credited to divine intervention, became known as kamikaze, or divine winds. The Mongol invasion strained the Kamakura Bakufu and accelerated changes in warfare, as the Mongols introduced tactics and weapons unfamiliar to the Japanese. The practice of dividing inherited lands among multiple sons led to the fragmentation of samurai estates and increasing economic pressure on warrior families. Many samurai became indebted to wealthy merchants, creating a paradoxical situation where the officially highest-ranking social class became economically dependent on the lowest. These changes created tensions within the warrior class. In 1333, a rebellion led by the discontented Emperor Go-Daigo and his supporters, including the powerful warrior Ashikaga Takauji, led to the collapse of the Kamakura shogunate after nearly 150 years. The Muromachi period and Ashikaga shogunate, the fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333, kicked off a fresh chapter in samurai rule. Emperor Go-Daigo tried to bring back direct imperial governance, but that experiment didn't last long. Ashikaga Takauji, who initially backed Go-Daigo, became disillusioned and raised his banner in rebellion. By 1336, he had taken Kyoto and set up a rival emperor. Go-Daigo fled to the mountains, creating a competing imperial court, which marked the start of the northern and southern courts. Takauji established a new military government based on the Kamakura Bakufu, but centered in the Muromachi district of Kyoto, which is how this period got its name. The Ashikaga shogunate would go on to rule Japan for over 2 centuries. Unlike the Kamakura, the Ashikaga shogunate never managed to centralize control. Takauji gained support by promising regional warlords more autonomy, but his government didn't have the strength to enforce tight control over far-off provinces. The Shugo evolved from Bakufu representatives into powerful regional lords known as Shugo daimyo, who kept their own armies and administrative setups. During the Muromachi period, there was an amazing cultural boom, especially in the arts, thanks to the warrior elite. The elegant aesthetics of aristocratic culture blended with the spiritual depth of Zen, Buddhism, and the practical mindset of the samurai, creating unique art forms. Ink landscape painting took off. Garden design reached new heights, and no theater emerged as a sophisticated performance art. The tea ceremony transformed from casual get-togethers into a highly formalized ritual, reflecting core Zen principles. However, while culture was thriving, political stability started to crumble in the later Muromachi period. The Yen War, which broke out in 1467, marked a major turning point. What began as a succession dispute within the Ashikaga family spiraled into 11 years of destructive warfare that devastated the capital and spread chaos throughout the provinces. By the time the fighting stopped in 1477, central authority had effectively collapsed, leading Japan into the chaotic Sengoku period, also known as the Age of Warring States. The refined world captured in the tale of Genji gave way to a new order dominated by the samurai class. Sengoku period, the Age of Warring States. The fall of centralized authority threw Japan into the chaotic Sengoku period, a time of almost non-stop warfare that lasted from the late 15th century to the early 17th century. During this era, political power came down to military might, and traditional claims to legitimacy didn't hold much water. Across the islands, ambitious daimyo feudal lords carved out their own territories, building castles, recruiting samurai retainers, and battling for dominance. A popular saying of the time summed it up perfectly. The lowly can be raised up, the mighty can be brought down. Warfare saw some serious changes during this time. The samurai's old-school preference for one-on-one combat shifted to meet the practical needs of mass battles. Huge infantry armies of ashigaru or foot soldiers, drawn from the peasantry, became vital on the battlefield. The arrival of European firearms in 1543, thanks to Portuguese traders landing on Tanegashima, completely changed the game. Smart warlords quickly added gun units to their forces, and by the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, their value was crystal clear. Castle building also took off during the Sengoku period, with earlier fortifications evolving into impressive stone fortresses. In this chaotic landscape, some truly exceptional military leaders emerged. Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin, fierce rivals, became legends for their strategic brilliance. Then there was Date Masamune, the one-eyed dragon, who built a powerful domain in northern Japan. The samurai class found themselves in a double-edged situation. There were chances to rise from obscurity to power through bravery, but even the highest-ranking samurai could lose everything in a single defeat. This intense environment really amplified warrior values like loyalty, courage, and accepting one's fate. Despite the constant fighting, cultural and economic growth didn't take a back seat. Regional daimyo supported Zen Buddhism, the tea ceremony, and various arts to showcase their sophistication. The aesthetic idea of wabi-sabi finding beauty in imperfection, transience, and simplicity reached its peak during this turbulent time. Commerce and manufacturing thrived, and maritime trade expanded through connections with China, Korea, and European powers, bringing fresh goods and ideas to Japan. By the mid-16th century, the wild competition among hundreds of independent daimyo began to settle into larger patterns of alliances and conquests. The stage was set for three remarkable leaders who would work toward reuniting Japan: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. These three unifiers would reshape the fragmented landscape of the Sengoku period into a centralized feudal state, marked by unprecedented stability and cultural achievement. The three great unifiers. Oda Nobunaga kicked off the unification with groundbreaking military tactics and sheer determination. Born in 1534 as a minor daimyo, He was a sharp military strategist who embraced innovation and wasn't held back by tradition. He fully adopted firearms, organizing specialized arquebus troops that wiped out his enemies. Nobunaga also rolled out administrative reforms that boosted central authority, including thorough land surveys and policies that promoted trade. He didn't hold back against religious institutions that challenged his power, famously taking down the militant Buddhist monasteries of Mount Hiei. By 1582, Nobunaga had conquered central Japan and was on the brink of completing national unification, but he was betrayed by his general Akechi Mitsuhide and forced to take his own life, a dramatic end that cut his ambitions short. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's most talented general, quickly stepped up as his successor. Born the son of a peasant farmer, Hideyoshi climbed the ranks through pure talent and grit. Over the next decade, he methodically extended his control across Japan, and by 1590, he had successfully unified the country militarily. Although he couldn't claim the title of shogun due to his humble origins, Hideyoshi earned increasingly prestigious titles and effectively made all the political decisions. He rolled out sweeping policies to reshape Japanese society and prevent future challenges, including the sword hunt of 1588, which disarmed the peasantry, and class separation laws that froze social mobility. Hideyoshi's ambitions didn't stop at Japan's borders. He launched 2 massive invasions of Korea, both of which fell short of conquering Ming China. Before his death in 1598, Hideyoshi made elaborate plans for his young son to take over, but the political balance he had created crumbled almost immediately. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a powerful daimyo and former ally of Nobunaga, patiently waited and outlasted his rivals. By 1600, 2 major alliances had formed, setting the stage for the pivotal Battle of Sekigahara. Thanks to superior preparation and the defection of key generals during the battle, Ieyasu scored a decisive victory, establishing himself as Japan's top military and political leader. In 1603, the emperor appointed Ieyasu as shogun, reviving a military title that had been vacant for years. With Ieyasu's victory and the elimination of Hideyoshi's son as a threat, Japan's century of civil war finally came to an end. The 3 great unifiers had transformed Japan from a patchwork of warring states into a centralized feudal system under one authority. Early Edo period and the Tokugawa shogunate. The Tokugawa family set up the most stable and long-lasting government in Japan's history by moving the administrative center to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo. This new political order, known as the Bakuhan system, struck a balance between central authority and local autonomy. The Tokugawa shogun directly controlled about a quarter of Japan's agricultural land, while the rest was divided among around 260 daimyo domains. To keep these powerful regional lords in check, the Tokugawa introduced a clever system of checks and balances. The most well-known method was the Sankin Katai, or alternate attendance system. This required daimyo to have 2 homes, one in their own domain and another in Edo, and to spend alternate years in each place. When they went back home, they had to leave their wives and heirs in Edo as hostages to assure their loyalty. The Tokugawa also solidified their rule by tightly controlling foreign contact through the Sengoku, or closed country policies. Remembering how European firearms had changed warfare, the shogunate saw foreign influence as a potential threat to stability. Between 1633 and 1639, a series of edicts banned Japanese from traveling abroad, limited foreign traders to specific ports, and prohibited Christianity. Only the Dutch were allowed a limited trading presence. The Tokugawa social structure was divided into a strict four-class hierarchy. At the top were the samurai, making up about 6% of the population, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. Below this official structure were outcast groups. This hierarchy reflected Neo-Confucian ideals, where everyone had a specific role to play in maintaining societal harmony. For the samurai, the peace brought about by the Tokugawa era led to significant changes. No longer active warriors in constant battle, they transitioned into roles as administrators, bureaucrats, and scholars. This shift created an identity crisis for a class that had prided itself on martial values. The idea of the literate warrior, skilled in both cultural and martial arts, became more important. The economic foundation of samurai life also changed dramatically. Most samurai became stipended retainers living in castle towns instead of landholding lords. This financial pressure, combined with the temptations of urban life, led many samurai into debt to wealthy merchant families, creating a strange situation where the highest-ranking social class became economically dependent on the lowest. The intellectual backbone of Tokugawa rule was mainly based on Neo-Confucianism, which provided the ethical justification for samurai rule and the strict social order. Zen Buddhism, however, still held sway among the samurai elite, offering a spiritual discipline that complemented their warrior training. The early Edo period also saw a burst of cultural growth, as peace and urban expansion created audiences and patrons for new art forms. Kabuki theater became a major dramatic art. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints showcased the floating world of urban pleasure districts, and Banraku puppet theater reached new artistic heights. By the mid-17th century, the Tokugawa had built a remarkably stable and well-structured governing system that lasted for over 2 centuries. The samurai class, no longer defined by their skills in battle, found new identities as administrators, scholars, and cultural leaders. Japan entered a period of isolation, but it was far from stagnant. Vibrant developments in economy, society, and culture continued to flourish within the framework of Tokugawa feudal institutions. Samurai culture and daily life. Samurai culture during the Edo period lived according to an elaborate code of conduct. Bushido, the way of the warrior, reached its most developed form during this long peace. This ethical code, drawing from Confucian ethics, Zen Buddhist philosophy, and indigenous Japanese traditions, emphasized loyalty, honor, self-discipline, and death rather than dishonor. The daily life of a samurai varied considerably depending on rank and wealth. High-ranking samurai served as senior administrators, while middle-ranking samurai filled specialized bureaucratic positions. The lowest-ranking samurai, forming the majority of the warrior class, lived in modest circumstances, struggling to maintain appearances appropriate to their status. The typical samurai residence in a castle town reflected both status considerations and practical needs, with simple calligraphy scrolls and flower arrangements serving as focal points. Samurai education emphasized both literary and martial training, the twin paths of the ideal warrior. Boys studied Chinese classics, calligraphy, and history, while also receiving martial training in swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship. The goal was to develop both physical skills and the proper mindset to act decisively without hesitation. The iconic samurai weapons and armor evolved into refined forms during the Edo period. The katana, or samurai sword, was considered the soul of the samurai and treated with ritualized respect. The right to wear two swords visibly distinguished samurai from commoners in everyday life. Samurai recreation balanced cultural refinement with martial spirit. Literary pursuits included poetry composition and calligraphy, while physical recreation maintained martial readiness. The tea ceremony evolved into a highly formalized ritual, embodying wabi-sabi aesthetics and providing spiritual contemplation. Sumo wrestling and archery competitions reinforced samurai identity as warriors, even in peaceful times. The samurai relationship with death formed a distinctive aspect of their culture, following the principle that the way of the samurai is found in death. Warriors were expected to maintain a constant awareness of mortality and readiness to die with dignity. Ritualized suicide, seppuku, represented the ultimate demonstration of samurai resolve, converting inevitable death into a final act of self-determination and honor. During the Edo period, samurai culture gradually penetrated other social classes. Wealthy merchants adopted samurai aesthetic tastes, and farmers incorporated elements of samurai ethical codes into village moral structures. This cultural diffusion created a distinctively Japanese civilization that transcended class boundaries. The samurai class, though relatively small in numbers, thus exerted influence far beyond its demographic weight, establishing cultural patterns that would endure even after the formal abolition of the feudal system. Women in samurai society. The lives of women in samurai households reflected the complex intersection of class privilege and gender constraints. While experiencing significant restrictions, samurai women nevertheless occupied positions of considerable responsibility and influence. Educational standards for daughters of samurai families were remarkably high, with young girls studying classical literature, calligraphy, and poetry. The moral code governing samurai women centered on the Confucian virtues of obedience, modesty, and loyalty, emphasizing that their behavior reflected not only on themselves, but on their husband's honor and their family's status. Marriage for samurai women was primarily a political and economic alliance between families. Upon joining her husband's household, the samurai wife assumed significant managerial responsibilities. She oversaw domestic servants, managed household finances, and ensured proper observation of religious rituals and social obligations. The production of male heirs represented a crucial obligation for samurai wives, ensuring the continuation of the family line and preserving its status. While samurai women rarely participated directly in combat, historical records describe exceptions during times of crisis. The most famous example was Tamo Gozen, who fought alongside her lord during the Genpei War. The naginata, a pole weapon with a curved blade, eventually evolved from a battlefield weapon into a symbolic martial art practiced by samurai daughters as both physical training and character development. The aesthetic and cultural contributions of samurai women significantly influenced Japanese civilization. They preserved and transmitted traditional arts like the tea ceremony and flower arrangement, and their patronage supported artisans and performers. Their cultural influence extended beyond the samurai class, as wealthy merchant families increasingly emulated their accomplishments. While samurai women were subordinate to male authority in formal power structures, they nevertheless wielded significant influence through household management, cultural accomplishment, and maternal authority. Rebellion and control in feudal Japan. Beneath the apparent serenity of Tokugawa rule lay persistent tensions that occasionally erupted into open rebellion. The Tokugawa peace was maintained through sophisticated systems of surveillance, legal control, and strategic application of force. The most famous rebellion of the early Edo period occurred in 1637 to 1638, when Christian peasants and masterless samurai rose up in the Shimabara Peninsula. The uprising was brutally suppressed, leading the shogunate to intensify its anti-Christian policies. Beyond religious rebellion, peasant uprisings constituted the most common form of resistance to feudal authority. The shogunate and daimyo governments developed sophisticated strategies for managing these rural tensions. Initial violent suppression was typically followed by strategic concessions, addressing the most egregious grievances while punishing identified ringleaders. Urban rebellions presented different challenges. Crowded cities could erupt into destructive riots during food shortages or in response to perceived injustice. The most dramatic samurai resistance came from ronin, or masterless samurai, whose severed lord-vassal relationships placed them outside normal control mechanisms. The most celebrated incident involving ronin was the 1702 vendetta of the 47 samurai of Aka domain. After their lord was forced to commit seppuku for attacking a shogunal official, these loyal retainers spent 2 years planning revenge. Their eventual success created a profound dilemma for shogunal authorities, but ultimately demonstrated that the age of the samurai as a military class had truly ended. The shogunate maintained comprehensive surveillance systems to identify potential threats before they materialized. The metsuk, or inspectors, formed an intelligence network monitoring daimyo activities and potential sources of unrest. Legal control represented another pillar of Tokugawa authority, with the shogunate issuing comprehensive legal codes governing everything from clothing to travel. Physical movement throughout Japan was also carefully regulated through a system of barrier stations on major roads. Within this controlling framework, however, Japanese society maintained remarkable internal stability. The Tokugawa system balanced firm control with pragmatic flexibility, maintaining core feudal hierarchies while allowing sufficient adaptability to address changing conditions. This dynamic stability characterized Japanese feudalism at its most developed stage, middle to late Edo period. As the Tokugawa peace extended into its second century, profound economic and social transformations occurred. The most significant economic development was the steady growth of a sophisticated commercial economy, increasingly divorced from the agrarian foundations of feudal society. Osaka emerged as the commercial center of Japan, where rice collected as tax revenue was converted into cash through commodity markets. Urban growth continued, with Edo surpassing 1 million residents to become the world's largest city. The samurai class faced increasing economic distress as their fixed stipends failed to keep pace with the commercialization of the economy. Many samurai fell into debt to merchant financiers, creating the painful paradox of the highest-ranking class becoming economically dependent on the lowest. The shogunate periodically attempted to reverse commercialization through sumptuary laws and moral exhortations, but these efforts could not permanently reverse the underlying economic transformation. Rural Japan also experienced significant changes. Agricultural innovations and the spread of commercial agriculture increased productivity and created new patterns of inequality. Proto-industrial production developed in both rural and urban areas, particularly in textiles and sake brewing, creating new forms of labor discipline outside traditional status hierarchies. The cultural life of the middle to late Edo period reflected these socio-economic transformations. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints depicted the floating world of urban pleasure districts. Kabuki theater reached artistic maturity and Banraku puppet theater flourished. Traditional elite cultural forms continued, but increasingly reflected changing social realities. The Middle Edo period witnessed Japan's first significant encounter with Western scientific knowledge through the policy of Rangaku, or Dutch learning. The small Dutch trading post at Dejima provided the sole official window to European developments. Japanese scholars gradually expanded their interests from practical medical knowledge to astronomy, geography, and military science. This awareness of Western technological advancement created an intellectual ferment despite Japan's formal isolation. By the late Edo period, this complex social reality increasingly strained against the formal feudal structure. Wealthy merchants and educated commoners questioned the official hierarchy. The samurai class faced a growing identity crisis as their military function became increasingly vestigial. The comfortable isolation that had allowed Japanese feudalism to develop its distinctive patterns was becoming untenable in a rapidly changing global environment. The end of an era, decline, restoration, and legacy. As the 19th century progressed, the Tokugawa system faced mounting pressures that would ultimately bring Japan's feudal era to a dramatic close. Economic strains, social tensions, and foreign threats converged to undermine the political structure. The final decades of Tokugawa rule witnessed increasing signs of systemic crisis and desperate reform attempts. Western imperial pressure delivered the decisive external shock. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay with 4 black ships, steam-powered warships, whose technology demonstrated Western military superiority. Perry delivered a letter from President Fillmore demanding diplomatic relations, and the shogunate, recognizing its military vulnerability, signed the Convention of Kanagawa in 1854. These treaty concessions triggered a profound political crisis. The shogunate had violated fundamental national seclusion policies without imperial approval, undercutting its legitimacy. The slogan Sanji, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians," gained popularity, especially among lower-ranking samurai in domains traditionally distant from Tokugawa control. Political divisions widened as various factions proposed conflicting responses to the Western challenge. Several domains, particularly Satsuma, Shuru, and Tosa, emerged as centers of opposition to Tokugawa hegemony. Initially divided, these domains gradually developed a unified perspective, advocating both imperial restoration and selective westernization to strengthen Japan against colonial threats. The shogun's final modernization efforts proved too little, too late. The last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, formally resigned in November 1867. However, radical elements from Satsuma and Shosho seized the imperial palace in Kyoto on January 3, 1868, and proclaimed the restoration of direct imperial rule. This event, known as the Meiji Restoration, marked the definitive end of feudal military government in Japan. The dismantling of feudal institutions proceeded with remarkable speed. The privilege of wearing swords, the visible symbol of samurai status, was eliminated in 1876. Military reforms replaced domain armies with a national conscript force, ending the samurai monopoly on martial service. The government converted hereditary samurai stipends to one-time cash payments, fundamentally altering the economic basis of samurai existence. These rapid changes provoked the last armed resistance from conservative samurai elements. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 led by the renowned samurai Seigo Takamori, represented the last major armed uprising of traditional warriors against modernizing reforms. Its decisive defeat demonstrated that the age of the samurai as a military class had truly ended. Despite the abolition of formal samurai status, former warrior families played crucial roles in Japan's rapid modernization. Many entered government service as bureaucrats, diplomats, and teachers. Others became officers in the new imperial military forces, transferring martial values to modern institutional contexts. The Meiji government consciously preserved and repurposed elements of samurai values, even while dismantling feudal institutions. Bushido was reinterpreted as a national ethic, with virtues like loyalty and self-discipline promoted as distinctively Japanese qualities expected of all imperial subjects. This selective adaptation of samurai ethics to modern nationalist purposes created ideological continuity amid institutional transformation. The actual historical samurai were neither the perfect warrior philosophers of romantic legend, nor merely brutal enforcers of feudal hierarchy. They were complex historical actors who created and maintained a distinctive social order that evolved over centuries. The tensions within samurai identity between violence and refinement, loyalty and ambition, tradition and innovation, reflected broader contradictions within human experience that give their story continuing resonance. The samurai legacy remains alive, not merely as historical memory, but as a continuing cultural resource that Japan and the world continue to explore, critique, and reinterpret. And so, our journey into the past comes to a quiet close. If you're still awake with me, I hope this tale brought you a little peace. If you enjoyed our time together, a gentle like lets me know. And subscribing means you'll never miss the next calm adventure. If you know someone who might need a little comfort tonight, feel free to share this story with them. Thank you, truly, for being here. Until next time, I wish you the sweetest dreams.